This is the DRF Sports Form podcast. Here's your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Sports Form podcast. This is episode 9. It is Wednesday, November 28th. As we record this, I am back in the New York groove, the Brooklyn groove, to be a little bit more specific, in the bunker. Muggsy, the handicapping Labrador, not down here right now, but when you hear that jingling in the background, that will mean she has arrived, and it will happen at some point during this broadcast. I am joined by my usual cohorts, the usual crew, we sometimes say in DRF podcast land. First up, he is the managing editor of DRF Sports Form and a handicapper in his own right. He is Scott Gramling. Scott, what's up?
How you doing, Pete? Good to be with you, as always.
Excellent. We are also joined by a man who, without irony, sometimes in conversation refers to himself as the kid, which I've got to ask him about sometime. But you don't know him as the kid. You might know him as the People's Champion. You definitely, on this show, know him as Mr. Friday Night Lights. Jonathon Kinchen. JK, what's happening?
It's really funny. I don't know why I say the kid. Anyways, but I'll tell you this.
You probably should have just denied it.
If you hear a jingle jangle coming down the stairs, it could be Muggs, the handicapping Labrador, or it could be a ghost, because Pete's basement is haunted. And what kind of friend is he when he's allowed me to sleep down there in a haunted basement at least 10 times?
Now, did you know we were talking about this today on the Steve Bick Show? Is that why you bring it up? Did you hear the appearance?
No, I had no idea.
Yeah, we talked about you and your fear of ghosts specifically on the Bick Show today. I suggest folks check that out. If you're just a sports betting person, you know, it's very racing centric, so it might not be for you. But if you're somehow a racing person and you're listening to the sound of my voice and you're not a regular At the Races with Steve Bick listener, check it out. There's this guy on Wednesday mornings who drags down the discourse a little bit, but generally it's a lot of fun. And yes, we go on crazy tangents, music, dining in Cincinnati, and JK's fear of ghosts among the tangential topics that we occasionally get to. But that's not what this show's about. This show, at this time of year, it's all about football. We're going to do something slightly different today, and we're going to talk a little bit more about college football than we usually do, with some interesting stuff coming up this weekend. That means, I suppose, gentlemen, we might run a little long. I didn't clear with you before the show. We don't usually do the production meetings in the middle of the show on the DRF Sports Form podcast the same way we do on the DRF Players podcast, our racing show, but we'll do one here. If we happen to run a few minutes long today, is that good with both of you guys? Do either of you need to run?
I don't need to run.
Let's see. Creed starts at... Yeah, I'm good.
That's a tangent we'll save for another show. But let's start off with the NFL, and we'll take a quick look because we have an interesting Thursday night game. Now, I realize that's going to be a bummer for some of you who are listening to this in podcast form, having downloaded it from iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and this Thursday night game is already over. So apologies to you for that. So we don't need to go that in-depth here, but there are some folks who listen to the show pretty much on arrival. And the game in general is just interesting enough that I think it definitely deserves some mention. Is this a game you will be betting, Scott?
I think I will be playing this. You know, I've been not as hard on the New Orleans Saints as I wish I'd been, as much as I was before the season, because I did get them to win the Super Bowl, but they have been on such a roll. The numbers have been so high. To me, this is a manageable number. It's 7 most places, 7.5 other places. I know the Cowboys have been playing better as of late, but to me, this is a spread here that the Saints should be able to cover, I think, with relative ease when you look at how much of a role they're on and how effective they've been, especially outside the division, really dating back to the beginning of last season.
they've been a buzzsaw, absolutely. And the Cowboys definitely have that schizoid streak for sure. I just worry, you know, a home team that's capable of playing as well as the Cowboys are at home. It does feel like a lot of points. Not that I'm rushing to the window to bet the Cowboys, but I do have a little bit of trepidation laying that many points on the road with the Saints. What's your thought on this one, JK? These are two teams we've had you talk about a lot on the show.
Funny enough, this game got my my yearly statement that where I said to a group of friends, if the Saints lose to the Cowboys, then I will never bet another sporting event in my life. Now, in full disclosure,
how many times have you made that statement this season?
Yeah, the 10 times I've probably said it in my life, probably 2 or 3 times the team lost, and I still come back for more. But here's one thing to keep in mind. I think is important about this situation is there's 3 offensive linemen that probably will all 3 play for the Cowboys, but all 3 are questionable, meaning that they're at least having limited practice time. So it's a short week, and you're playing against a team who is likely to be scoring a lot of points. They're either going to have you down or you're going to have to match them point for point. And you're going to have some upfront blitz pickup defensive linemen wearing you out issues. I mean, I think the Saints are going to absolutely roll in this game. I like the game -7, 7.5. Obviously, it's beautiful for the teaser situation when you can get the Saints coming down just to win. It's indoor. It's in a dome. Obviously, Sean Payton, Drew Brees will be motivated. Sean Payton using the coach for the Cowboys, and then Drew Brees being from Texas. Like I said, short week. Give me the better quarterback, the better staff, the better team, and I think the Saints absolutely dominate on Thursday night.
Can I throw something else out
please.
there? And I think JK makes good points. You know, something I heard, a theory I heard during the week is that the Saints and Sean Payton really want to try and get Drew Brees this MVP award. And as Patrick Mahomes keeps putting up points and numbers, I think he's obviously the stiffest competition here. I think there's a factor in that where the Saints are kind of still, you know, watch them. They're still kind of running the ball, throwing the ball. They're trying to put up points deep into these games, even when they're up big. And I think that's something that's worthy of consideration when you're looking at the Saints laying points, and you can make the determination that maybe 7, 7.5, even on the road, just isn't too many points. And you look at this Cowboys team, they've kind of beaten up on the weaker opponents. And let's be honest, Philadelphia is a weaker opponent this season. Atlanta is another one. Those are a couple teams that are among the worst in the league against the spread. And then that Redskins game, even though the Cowboys ended up covering the spread, winning by 8 as a 7-point favorite, the Redskins had missed an extra point in that game, and there were some questionable calls, especially down the stretch.
For sure. That
call not made on the Jordan Reed play. So I temper expectations on the Cowboys. I'm really with JK on this. I do think that Saints could roll.
Scott, there's a stat that, and maybe you can look it up and tweet it. And it's not an exact stat because Washington does have a winning record. However, they have a backup quarterback. So I'm going to lump them into the losing record team. I'm curious what teams do when they are playing a team that has won 3 games in a row against teams with losing records. I feel like the market might give that 3-game win streak probably a little bit more credit than it deserves, considering they're playing against teams that are that have been losing. I mean, like I said, the Washington Redskins don't have a losing record, but I think the point that we're trying to make is that they're an underperforming team, and I think you could just kind of lump them in that, having a backup quarterback in.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because I've been burned on that this year with the other team in your great state, the Houston Texans, because they were coming off these wins against teams with losing records, and I thought they were overvalued, and all they keep doing is winning and covering.
It can cut both ways, but I think that's smart to try to look for areas where the market might overvalue recency that's maybe not all that it's cracked up to be. We see that.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a very good point.
We see it in racing a lot of times with horses dominating weaker fields, and then you get that a stronger field have to face a totally different pace scenario. Sometimes very different things come up. This brings up a good tangent that will still be relevant and you guys have pretty much turned me around, by the way, on this one. Certainly makes a ton of sense for teasers, but I like that MVP point a little bit, Scott, about a reason why they might keep the foot on the gas just that much more and get to where they need to be in the spread. But I'll tell you this, I'm looking at, I don't know how reliable these odds are that I'm seeing for NFL MVP right now. I don't know how updated they are, but I'm seeing 5-1 Drew Brees, and I'm thinking that's a great number. Now, I understand there's other ways to go here, and there's a lot of hype around some of the other players at the lower end of the market, most specifically, as you mentioned, Patrick Mahomes. But don't you kind of feel like sometimes these awards, in addition to rewarding an amazing achievement, which certainly Brees and the Saints offense have had this season, but there's also like a little bit of a lifetime achievement award that sometimes comes into play. And here we have Brees, who I'm pretty sure has never won one of these, having the season that he's having, potentially with a strong finish. I've got to go ahead and, if that number's real, advise that bet right now. What's your thoughts on the NFL MVP, Scott?
I agree with you 100%, Pete. It is, look, it's not strictly a popularity contest, but when voters, and these are voters and they are humans, are trying to make a choice between two guys who are worthy, then they're going to end up going with, you're right, more of the Lifetime Achievement Award. And the human instinct is, oh, Mahomes, gosh, he's going to be, he'll win 3 or 4. This might be the last chance that Brees ends up getting. That's the way I'm going to go. I'm completely with you on that one.
JK, any thought on that before we move on to the next game?
Yeah, the fear of losing our non-racing listeners here. This is Zenyatta and Rachel, right? It's that lifetime achievement that's going to be considered. What, we haven't given this a horse of the year. We haven't given Drew Brees an NFL MVP. And this is the year to do it. If it's even close, if it's even kind of close, if it's even not that close, I think Drew will get it at the rate that he's at right now, the season he's leading the Saints to, especially after kind of a rocky start. I mean, they didn't lose a lot of games, but they were barely beating teams that I think they would be favored by a couple touchdowns playing against now. So I think that he'll definitely get it if he's close enough.
Well, given the prices I'm seeing, it might be worth a call to your buddy Marv out in the desert there, JK, and see what's available in the real world as far as that goes, because that could be something interesting. Let's move on to Sunday and talk about Scott's team, the New England Patriots, who are playing against the Minnesota Vikings. But I want to start this one by throwing it to JK, because I know you had you had a Patriots observation you wanted to make. What was this?
I just saw a fun tweet. I don't fully agree with it, but it's a fun tweet. Adam Rank tweeted, I believe on Sunday. He said, Gronk is like the NFL version of the McRib. He's only available for limited times each year, but when he's here, he's special. I actually don't like the McRib, but I will agree that he is an absolute game changer when he shows up and he plays. The things that he can do to a defense from a personnel standpoint, where he can line up and the defenses that they can call, and the ability that the Patriots have to get into a heavy run set or be in a 5-wide set with him being in there. Another really nasty player from a personnel standpoint is Cordell Patterson. When he shows up and they can still run the ball, that gives defenses big fits. But I think Gronk's amazing, and they're better when he's playing.
I should have known. I was confused when you said the quote about how you were going to disagree from a football point of view, but of course you were disagreeing from the fast food point of view. It's all making sense. But
McRibs are not delicious. They're just not delicious.
I want to talk to Scott about Gronkowski and this game in general. How important is he to the Patriots? How much is he the threat that he once was versus just a decoy at this point? Where are you with him and what he means to the Patriots?
He's the threat because when he's on the field, he has to be accounted for. And I think the underrated part of Gronk is the run blocking part of it. They do run the ball more effectively when he's on the field. And it makes sense. I mean, the guy's a giant. Look, just setting aside my profession for a second and talking as a fan for about 20 seconds, I love Rob Gronkowski. He's my favorite player of all time, and I love when he's in the game. And I'm older now. I don't really, jump around that much, when the Patriots scored a touchdown. But when he scored that touchdown against the Jets on Sunday, I was jumping around like a little kid. I don't even know what it was in me. It's just seeing him, just physically dominate the opposition when they need a big play. And, that was a third and relatively long situation. And it's like they just it's backyard type football, right? It's like, all right, we need a big play. Hey, get the big kid and run to the end zone and we'll throw it up and you will catch it. And it really returns football to the simplicity and the backyard game. And I think that's what I've always loved about Gronk.
Good stuff. We had something else on this, JK?
It's a heck of a catch just from a technical standpoint, from a receiver standpoint. The catch that he made, although it was impressive, and I think maybe the average fan would be like, oh wow, 85% of the players in the NFL would have dropped that ball. The contact that was made to his arms and elbow during that catch, and he barely double clutched it. Like that is a special football play that might be very underrated in the overall scheme of things. But I thought it was very fun to watch. You'd be very proud of me, Scott. I was in Chicago for the weekend, and there's sometimes I'll wake up and I'll be alive in a game or something, and I'll tell the girlfriend, look, I don't care where we eat. They just need to have TVs. and if it's a national coverage game, then that's good. If it's not, we're gonna need to go somewhere that We ended up in Chicago at a Patriots bar.
Nice.
And I felt like you'd have been proud of me there. So
very proud.
I was sweating the game, so it worked out perfectly.
Excellent.
Good
Love
stuff. It. Good stuff. And Gronk, definitely those hands worthy of discussion anytime he comes up. Let's talk about this from a gambling point of view. Scott, we've got the Patriots about 5-point favorites at home, looking at a line 48.5 that I'm seeing at present. Will you be at this game, and will you be having a wager?
I will be at the game, and I will be having a wager. And I'll harken back to what we were talking about less than 10 minutes ago. You start to look at the kind of underneath the records of these teams, and you take a look at a team like the Vikings. And I think a lot of people will be a little surprised to hear that the Vikings this season have yet to win a game against an opponent that currently has a winning record. And I think that comes as a surprise because you kind of think back at the Vikings this year. They've played in some marquee games. Well, they've lost those marquee games. And they did beat the Packers on Sunday night, but let's be honest, this Packers team is not a good team. And we've talked about it a bit here on the podcast throughout the season. I'm not sure if JK is completely with me, but I've been saying I think that the Packers are not a top 20 team. I don't think they're a top 25 team from player number 2 to 53. I think it's player number 1 that hides a lot of those deficiencies, and those deficiencies keep coming through. So I'm not putting a lot of stock in the Vikings' one-score win at home over the Packers this past weekend. They lost by 10 to the Saints, and on the one hand, it's like, well, everybody's losing by 10 to the Saints, but that was a home game, and that was a marquee type of game. They lost by 7 to the Rams. The Rams have not been that good against the spread this season. And, really the games that they have won have been against some of the weakest teams in the league. When you look at San Francisco, Philadelphia, Arizona, the New York Jets, the Lions, this is a situation here where I feel like the Patriots laying less than a touchdown at home is value in the home team here. Patriots have won 10 straight regular season home games, 12 straight games at home if you count the 2 playoff games they won last year. And, they've also been very solid against the spread. In those 10 regular season games, they've won 7 by at least 2 touchdowns. They've covered the spread in all 10 of those regular season home games, except for one. The one they didn't cover was a 3-point win as a 3.5-point favorite over Kansas City. So they're a half point away from having gone 10-0 against the spread over the last 10 regular season home games. I just feel like this is a spot here where there's good value with the Patriots laying anything less than a touchdown.
It does feel like historically the Brady-Belichick combo in smaller spreads, games where they're supposed to win, not only win, but win in cover. You mentioned the streak in the last 10 games, the kind of actionable info you can find in the DRF Sports Form. But I just feel like it goes back way farther than that this particular combination they win. They not only win when they're supposed to win a lot of the time, but they'll also turn that into a cover. Different story when they're huge favorites, but this is the exact type of game I always feel like you can bet them with some confidence anyway. JK, I know you well enough to know that it's the Patriots for you here. Is this one that you're interested in teasing, or is this one where you're interested in the points?
It's absolutely not. The Patriots.
Really?
Yeah, it's a no play for me. There's three quarterbacks I do not ever bet against because I value the quarterback play in the NFL so much.
That's why I said what I said.
Yeah, but it's I just won't play it. But if I was playing it, I would play Minnesota, and I'll tell you why. But it's Tom, Aaron, and Drew. I don't bet against them. I'll just pass the game. I don't bet against them unless they're playing one another. Then maybe I'll get involved.
Let's hear the Vikings case though.
Well, I think Minnesota's pretty good. I agree. Scott's made a good point that they haven't really got over the hump against really good teams. One thing that I think is the Patriots' biggest kryptonite is a pass rush. I think it's the thing they struggle with the most. Tom's obviously not that mobile anymore. It helps when Gronk's playing because they can do some things to help with protection and getting those ends into wider, like 9 techniques rather than being tighter, closer to the tackles. But the Minnesota is number 2 in sack percentage, which is a stat I look at. I go to this team ranking sometimes, and we'll just look at that's some pretty cool sortable stats, and sack percentage is one that I'll look at, and I just think that they'll get after Tom a little bit, and I would be worried. I would take them to win the football game, but getting the 5 points, or even in a tease situation where I could tease them up another 6 or 7 to get that on the other side of 2 scores, I would take Minnesota. But like I said, it's a pass game for me, but because I just won't bet against those quarterbacks. However, the pass rush that Minnesota has makes me a little bit concerned.
All right, fair enough. Let's talk about Sunday night. The Chargers at the Steelers has been flexed into this position. Currently, the line, Pittsburgh -3.5 with an over-under of 51.5. JK, is this a game you'll be playing? These are 2 quarterbacks who who have crossed you off their holiday card list since this podcast went into existence. How does that affect you betting? Does that make it an automatic pass, or might you get involved?
Yeah, I will not be betting the Body Language Bowl. Not a fan of either one of these quarterbacks. It is Sunday night, so maybe a little half a unit action play or something just to have something to do on Sunday evening. I will tell you this. I don't agree with it. The Prince of Keeneland, if you listen to the racing podcast, you know who the Prince of Keeneland is. He absolutely loves the Chargers. He talks about them every Sunday, and I don't get it. So I guess if you wanted the Prince of Keeneland's opinion, he'd go that way. I do not have a side here. I dislike both teams and both quarterbacks very much. I'll let Scott say something intelligent.
The Body Language Bowl. Scott, please elevate the level of discourse here.
I got to say, I absolutely love the Steelers in this spot. This is one of my favorite plays of the year. And it's the same theme that's carried through this show, that when you look at the Chargers, they've beaten up on the weak teams, and they have not risen to the occasion against the better teams. They've suffered double-digit defeats in the only 2 games that they've played this season against teams that would be in the playoffs if the regular season ended today. And now, saying the regular season ended today, obviously it doesn't, but we are getting in. This game's going to be played in the month of December. So it's not like we're making that kind of comment before the midway point of the season. All but one of the Chargers against the spread victories this season have come against teams that are on pace to end 2018 with 6 or fewer victories. I just feel like that this is a spot, and you can go back to the beginning of last season. The narrative of last season for the Chargers was, they started 0-4, and then they came on strong. They narrowly missed out on a playoff berth. But when you look closely at all that, They halted that 4-game losing streak with consecutive wins against the Giants, Raiders, and Broncos. Those teams ended last year with a combined record of 14-34 straight up. They then lost 2 straight to fall to 3-6. And then when they reeled off 4 consecutive wins, it was against the Bills, making that first Nathan Peterman infamous start where he threw the 5 interceptions in the first half. Then it was against Dallas that was reeling without Ezekiel Elliott. Dallas came into that game. It was a Thanksgiving game. They came in that game having been outscored 64-16 over its previous 2 games. Then they beat the Browns. Browns ended up winless last year. And in fact, the Browns covered that game. That was the first game that the Browns had covered on the road in 413 days. And then they ended up beating the Redskins, which had a losing record at the time, and they'd end the season with a losing mark and ended up 2-6 away from home. I'm bringing all this stuff up because I think there's a pattern there. There's a trend. There's a sample size where the Chargers have been one of those teams dating back to the start of last year that excels against weak competition. And when they go up against better teams, and you look at it last year, Los Angeles last season, 0-5 against opponents that ended 2017 with 10 or more wins. So to me, this is I just like the Steelers a lot. The home road splits with the Steelers are significant. You look at the Steelers, they're coming off that game in Denver, and I did love Denver in that game, and we had Denver winning outright in the Sports Forum, and we talked a bit about it on this show last week. But the Steelers turning the ball over, and that's what I was afraid of going into Denver. They just don't take care of the football on the road. And I think it's carelessness on the part of Roethlisberger that sort of seeps in there. But coming off a game with a turnover margin of worse than -3, the Steelers are 7-3 against the spread under Tomlin. And there's betting systems that also point to the Steelers here. You look at NFL home favorites that are coming off 3 wins over a 4-game stretch. They're 25-4-1 against the spread since the start of 2009 when facing an opponent that comes in having won 8 or more of its prior 10 games. That's a significant sample size, and we're talking about teams that are hot, that are coming in with that many wins over a significant stretch, just underperforming in those situations. To me, this is a big game for Steelers here. I just love the Steelers in this spot. Throw in the fact that it's in prime time, and you look at what the Steelers have done at home. This is actually the 3rd time since the start of October that the Steelers will have been favored at home by 3.5 points. Previous 2 games, they won by 24 and 31. They're not going to win this one by that many points, but I would be surprised if they don't win by at least double the amount of the spread.
All right. I was typing all that to warn the Prince of Keelan to not bet.
JK, I can email it to you.
I was warning him. I got it out there. I think I've got him off. He's telling me he's teased him up to 10, but I told him that might not be good enough.
Oh, no, I don't think it is.
Oh, man. Amazing. Question for you, Scott, about DRF Sports Form and the power rankings that you can find in there. Do they take into account this type of strength of schedule info we've been talking about throughout today's show?
There's 2 types of rankings in there. We have power ratings, and that's a pretty prominent spot in the Platinum Sheet as well, which you can get at foxsheets.com, has all the information there. And then there's another set of ranking called Outplay Factor, and it's the Outplay Factor ratings that really take into account more of the strength of schedule. Power ratings do take into account strength of schedule for sure, but it's a couple different ways of looking at things. And again, there's debates on each side of this, and it's an inexact science, which is, I think, what we all love about sports handicapping. There's as much art as there is science in it. A lot of people look strictly at point differential. Some will discount. And when we talk about a lot of betting systems that have worked for us here on this show this year, we discount kind of point differential when it gets too lopsided. So it's almost like when they're making the lines, Baltimore is a good example of a team that tends to get overvalued because they're hammering these teams, and they're beating up on the Bills by 30 plus points, and then all of a sudden it's a bit out of whack, and somehow they're favored at Carolina in a game that they end up losing by double digits. All this stuff is factored in, but again, it's this kind of man versus machine thing. And I prefer to look at it as it's man plus machine, where you got to look at all these different angles. There's not one way to look at it, but I do think that the power ratings give a very solid foundation in handicapping these games. And I also think the outplay factor does as well. And, I'm sure if you spoke with 10 Platinum Sheet or 10 Sports Form readers, they all go about things differently. I remember 4 years ago, my father just went strictly by the outplay factor ratings. He thought they were the greatest thing since sliced bread. But, everything kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. And, nothing's going to be a surefire winner over long periods of time, which is where the art comes into handicapping.
Absolutely. All right, I want a quick minute on best bets before we move on to these college games. Scott, I feel like you've already revealed yours in the form of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Do you have another one to touch on quickly? Then we'll get JK's, then we'll talk college for a minute.
Yeah, Steelers are my favorite bet. I would say if I'm going to give out my favorite total of the week, it's under 49 in this Falcons-Ravens game. I just feel like with Lamar Jackson there that there's going to be a lot of running of the football, and I think there's going to be some sustained drives, and I also feel like it's too tall an order to ask Lamar Jackson to be putting up points. They put up the 34 in the Raiders. A lot of that was because of special teams and Raiders being careless with the football. I feel like when you look at the game before that, they were going against the Cincinnati Bengals, which are as weak a defense as there is in the league, and the Ravens only put up 24 points. I think the number 49 is too high a total for this Falcons-Ravens game.
All right, JK, a best bet from you?
I absolutely love the Saints. 7.5. I'll take the game at 9. Look, if the over-under is 52, so Vegas thinks they're going to score 52 points combined, I mean, you're telling me that the Cowboys are going to stick around and score with the Saints with their offensive line woes? No, thank you. I think the Saints absolutely roll.
All right, fair enough. Let's move on to these college championship games, and let's start with one that I know is near and dear to your heart, JK, in the Big 12.
Well, let me just tell you this real fast, just a little story. When I was at Texas, we used to, it's the game between Oklahoma is played in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl. And so you walk in through it's in the middle of the state fair. So you have to literally walk in through the fair to get to the game. And the 4 years that I went to school here, we lost every year, and walking out of there having to deal with the Oklahoma fans fresh off of a victory was enough for me to say I'm never going back. And I have not been back since. I have never been back since. Even when we went on the run of just beating them a lot, I won't go back. It's just that awful. It's going to be a little classier this Saturday when they're playing in Cowboys Stadium. I think we were fortunate enough to be the only loss on their record. I think that in order for us to win the football game, we have to play up a couple of notches, maybe 3 notches. They have to play down maybe 2 or 3 notches. And those scenarios are not good when you're looking for a wager. I would encourage players who are really looking for a betting opportunity to bet on Oklahoma. I'll be rooting like heck for Texas. I will not be playing the game. I'm one of those players that I do not bet against Texas, even if I think that it's the best line ever created. I can't mentally do it. I don't bet against my own team. But it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough in that ball game.
The man bleeds burnt orange, folks. Scott, I know you had a question specifically for JK about this game, and that I wanted your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, JK, I mean, look at the last 5 years at the neutral site. Texas has been pretty significant underdog in a number of these games. I'm talking, this year they were only a 7-point dog, but last year 8.5, and they ended up covering that. They lost by 5. They lost by 5 the year before. It was an 11.5-point underdog. And then the 2 years before that, 16 and 16 and a half points. And they won the one game outright, and the other one they only lost by 5. I mean, a Texas-Oklahoma game hasn't been decided by more than 7 points since Texas won 36-20 as a 13.5-point underdog in 2013. What is it about the Longhorns in recent years that they've been able to play Oklahoma tight and close and even win a couple of these games that they had no right winning from a bookmaker's point of view?
Well, I think the first thing about that is that when that game takes place, it always is the same weekend in October. And so it's always about the fifth, sixth, or seventh game of the season. Mm-hmm. So I think there's still a lot to be learned because both teams have been playing kind of their easier non-conference schedule. They haven't gone through conference play. You don't really know exactly what you're dealing with, who you're dealing with. And the excitement of that event being at the Cotton Bowl and it being the Red River Shootout and looking up in the stands and one half is orange and one half is red and everyone you know is telling you this is the most important game you've ever played in your life. Teams play up. Teams can't meet up to the pressure. There's a lot of different variables that make that game really hard to predict and can also keep it very close because the amount of emotion and the motivation that's brought to the game in terms of preparation. Now, this is a situation that hasn't happened, at least since I've been paying attention, which is us meeting in postseason. Everything's established. We're playing on a neutral site that's not the Cotton Bowl with the hoopla that's surrounding that. There's a whole body of work for the odds makers to create a line that makes the most sense. There's a whole body of work for teams to prepare for one another and have an idea what's going on. And we just haven't been explosive enough, consistent enough, disciplined enough throughout the entire season that I just feel like we have a shot in this situation. So all the stats you brought up, I think that they're real when the game's being played in October. But I think it's a little bit different when the game's being played in December.
Interesting. Scott, your thoughts on betting this one, Scott?
Yeah, I like Texas here. I just look at what they've done this season. And the 2 games they've lost by 3 at Oklahoma State. Very tough spot at Oklahoma State. It's a quality program that puts up, solid numbers offensively year in and year out. And then there was the 1-point loss at home to West Virginia. I just feel like this Texas team plays defense well enough in a conference that doesn't play defense, that they catch these good offensive teams off guard in certain instances. And when you look at the losses that they've had since the season opener, it's just those 2 games. It's the Oklahoma State and the West Virginia games. And they just seem to be able to keep it close. I like the points here. Very generally speaking, I do like sound defense against these video game type offenses. And, Oklahoma, I think, gets everybody's attention when they're sitting there and they're rolling up 50-plus points against, the Kansas States and TCU and Texas Tech. And, the West Virginia game over Thanksgiving weekend on that Friday was absolutely ridiculous with nobody playing defense in that game. I think Texas has a gutty team. I think Herman has really done a solid job coaching them. And I would take the point. I can't say I love the game, but I have more than a slight lean into taking the points here with Texas.
I feel bad. I feel like I need to go back and pick the Patriots now. You picked my Longhorns. I feel like this is unfair now. I appreciate it.
This is now we're even because you watched the Patriots at a Patriots bar. So this is what I had to give back.
Look, I think they're an improving football team that is trying to create a new culture. And these are a lot of the things I'm going to say in the next 15 seconds are not things that you really want to hear as a sports bettor, but I think they're traveling in the right direction as a football team. And I wouldn't be shocked if they show up and they play well and they get a couple good bounces. I just think they have to play well. And Oklahoma has to struggle to a certain extent. Oklahoma is just much more explosive and consistent than Texas is offensively. And in this league, that means a lot. So I'm hoping that you're right.
All right, let's move on.
Texas just seems to not get blown out. They seem to be in every game, and I think that's why I'm siding with them in this.
Well, that's because we're the best team in the nation. That's why.
All right, we'll move on from there. It will be fascinating. I have much more of a vested interest in watching that game now after listening to you two talk about it, which is sort of the point of the show. So that's good stuff. Let's move on to the SEC title game. JK, you've had so many winning predictions on this show that I haven't followed you in on. Of course, I just had to be sitting there at exactly the wrong time with the Iron Bowl starting over the weekend to say, oh, I'll follow JK in. I don't think our bet really lasted. Our under bet was live much past the half. But these things happen, and I'll be smarter and follow you along for a longer stretch the next time. Let's talk about this Georgia-Alabama game. JK, where are you heading?
I don't bet against Tom Brady. I don't bet against Aaron Rodgers. I don't bet against Drew Brees, and I don't bet against Nick Saban. They're just a better football team. They're better coached. They're better at every position than the teams that they play against. I don't love the line. It's not a situation where I'm going to try to cut in line to bet. To bet on Alabama in this situation, considering that 13 points, that's a lot in a championship game against the number 4 team in the country, a well-coached team, a talented team in their own right, and I believe they're playing in Atlanta, so a bit of a home game for Georgia. But I just don't see – my brain doesn't process how Alabama loses the football game. From a betting standpoint, if you had to pick a side, I would take Georgia, but it's not a play that I'd recommend because it can be 52-7. Don't get it confused.
Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, currently seeing Alabama minus 13.5 with an over/under of 63.5. Scott, where are you going here?
I love Georgia in this spot. I love Georgia getting these points. I don't disagree with what JK is saying with Alabama being as impressive and dominant as they are. But look, this is a game that went to overtime in the national championship game at the beginning of this calendar year. I know the teams are different, but not only has Alabama improved, Georgia has improved. And give LSU a lot of credit for knocking off Georgia. But I think since that loss, Georgia has been able to kind of fly under the radar a little bit here with some impressive victories. I think Georgia, they are ranked number 4. To me, they're definitely a top 3 team. I put them neck and neck with Clemson. I just feel like getting all these points to me is a way you have to go with the Georgia team that is getting a bit disrespected here. And I think it is because of that LSU loss and the fact that they've just sort of, gone about their business since then. I could see this being a one-score game in the end. Now, in the end, I do think it's the athletes and it's the coaching, it's everything that JK said that Alabama has going for it that will have Alabama winning this game. I can't recommend taking Georgia on the money line, which we did have in Platinum Sheet in the national championship game last year, and that was a brutal loss to have that game go into overtime and not win on the money line. But we did have the points as well. To me, I just think there's an awful lot of value on Georgia at anything that's a double-digit spread.
Sounds like JK doesn't really disagree with that at all. He's just following one of his rules of life there.
Yep.
Let's briefly touch on the Northwestern Ohio State matchup in the Big Ten before I let you guys go. Finally, Scott, we'll keep it with you for this one.
Yeah, this is it's a tricky game, right? I think the number's about right. It's Ohio State by 14.5. Northwestern is one of those teams that just seems to, they're well coached. They get good quarterback play. The funny thing about this matchup to me is hearkening back to 5 years ago when these teams met during the regular season, and it was the epically bad beat that ended up being the Northwestern was getting 6.5 or 7, depending on where you got the game at home. And they ended up giving up they were up 30-27, gave up a late touchdown to go down 34-30, had one last desperation play. It was that dreaded lateral the ball around, the play that hasn't worked since the Stanford band ran on the field in, what was that, 1982?
Yeah, I was watching that game, actually. Yep.
Everybody ends up trying that, and the ball ended up rolling into the end zone, and Ohio State pounced on it, and they won by 10 points.
That's worth watching on YouTube. That clip is out there, and if you haven't seen it, it is in the Sports Bad Beat Hall of Fame.
Well, in the digital edition of Sports Form this week, if you go to page 23, which is the page that we give all the details on the Northwestern Ohio State Big Ten championship game, I snuck a little Easter egg hyperlink in there. So I underlined bad beat, and if you click on that, that could, before I go so far into saying that, I don't know if the technical guys end up doing that or getting it through for me, but definitely look it up on YouTube. And I think if you just search Brent and Northwestern, because Brent Musburger was doing the game, it'll come up.
Yeah, and we'll send that out around on Twitter to make sure folks see it. It's definitely worth it.
It made my stomach hurt.
Yeah.
It reminded me, and Scott, you'll know, and Pete and I always have a rule on our podcast, but you're not on the other one, so I can break the rule not to ask a question that I know you might not know the answer to. What was the scenario when Troy Polamalu was with the Steelers and it was like some crazy last minute pick six fumble recovery
against
situation
the Chargers? Yeah, I watched that game. I was betting that game in running, actually, and it was painful. I think I've blocked it out.
That was about 10 years ago.
Yes, I think it was exactly 10 years ago.
Yeah, right. Steelers, it's coming back to me now. So Steelers were favored between 3 and 7. I'm just trying to think here. Was it a Hail Mary that he brought back? I can't even.
Something weird where he should have fallen down, but he didn't.
It led to all manner of conspiracy theory. And I thought, was there a referee involved?
It wasn't counted, right? He returned it for a touchdown, and it wasn't counted.
Somebody better, JK, get to Googling.
It was disgusting. Whatever it was.
One of these days, I'll recount the worst beat of all time. We don't have time for it now, but it was in a USC Arizona State game in '96. How's that for a tease?
That's going back. I like it. And we'll tell the Polamalu story next time, too. JK, did you have a thought on this Big Ten title game before we get out of here? Ohio State is entirely – this is one of those games where – and this isn't always the smartest thing to do, but one of those games where you can find an edge here. From top to bottom, every football player on Ohio State's starting 22 is better than the one that plays at Northwestern. Not always, but in most situations. It's a lot of points. Ohio State still has a little bit to play for here. Northwestern found a way to lose 4 games throughout the season. Ohio State did lose to Purdue. I don't think Purdue's nearly as bad as one would think. And Ohio State's obviously had some controversy surrounding the program. I would imagine there's some players that have probably distanced themselves a little bit from the leadership there. And so that can always be hard to kind of keep going in the right direction. Like I said, if you were inclined to play, I would look at Ohio State, but it's a very high line of 14. I would probably tend to pass in this situation. A final thought from you, Scott, on this game or anything else happening this weekend?
I'll give you a final thought on Troy Polamalu because I had a few seconds to look this up. It was one of those crazy lateral plays. Polamalu returned it for a touchdown with the score at 11-10 on the last play of the game, but then it was ruled that one of those laterals was an illegal forward pass, meaning the ball was dead at that point, regardless of what Polamalu decided to do with it afterward. But the thing about it was posted at 17-10. So people that had the Steelers laying the 4.5 thought they had won, and then it really wasn't. It wasn't really announced, right? This is 10 years ago, so it's not as it is today with everybody having everything at their fingertips with their phone, kind of the way it was 10 years ago. And it ended up being an 11-10 victory, even though it should have been 17-10 because the touchdown should have counted. It would have been a play that the Steelers declined the penalty. Anyway, final thoughts. I would say, just generally with these games, these conference championship games, keep in mind that there are 6 of them on neutral fields, and there are 4 of them where the better team is hosting. And to me, the one that's the most intrigue among the second tier is UCF, who lost Mackenzie Milton, their starting quarterback, that line opened at 6 and even 6.5, and it's been bet all the way down to 3 and 3.5. I think that's an overreaction. I think UCF is a quality football team, and as good a quarterback as Milton is, it's a good system there. It's a well-coached team. I feel like with UCF being at home and laying that few points, to me, that's a play definitely worth going to the window on.
All right, it occurs to me during the show, we're going to need to do a College Bowl special at some point, maybe a two-parter. There's so many of them.
I love it.
We'll figure out some way to do that, maybe bring in a special guest or two and have some fun. Really enjoyed.
We got like for the Breeders' Cup, we got to do a competition, all of us together.
You know what?
Yes.
Matt Bernier would be maybe fun to involve in that, speaking of
absolutely. We could do a four-person contest. That'd be fun.
I like it. I like it. We're going to get something
Can
good
I
going.
give one more shout out here?
Please.
The Sports Form last week was quite profitable in its college football picks, as we had both Gary Bennett and I went 4-0 on our parlay cards.
Nice.
And then in the best bets that are available at foxsheets.com, I was 7-1-1 against the spread in college, and Bennett was 4-0-1. So
Tremendous.
That's a pretty healthy combined 11-1-2, and the only loss was on me. It was North Carolina State that I had laying 6.5, and they won by only 6. So we've heated up a little bit here. So if you're listening out there, you might want to dig in a little bit and kind of cash in on some of what we have to offer.
Here's what I'll say: just like any convention you can go to, if you're a professional, if you're a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, whatever it is, if you can go to these conventions and you pick up one thing, it's worth it. And that's how I feel about the Sports Forum. If you're going to attack the weekend and you're going to make some wagers and get involved in some games, being able to just have some people that are seeing the ball differently than you are can really give you some angles to help you just pick up that one thing that can make your weekend either profitable or a losing weekend. And so I always recommend trying to get as many edges as you possibly can.
It's smart, and I love what Scott was talking about before, something we've talked about on the racing side with our friend Tony Joe, the idea of it not being man versus machine so much as man plus machine. There's some terrific machine learning type knowledge in those numbers that you can see in there. You can put that computing power on your side. You can read Scott's analysis, get his insight into what his best bets are. And if you're not a goofball like me who doesn't follow him in on those and then listens to the one that the JK threw off at the last minute, you can act, unlike me, you can actually have a winning weekend of college football and the NFL, which is a beautiful thing. All right, that is it. It is our longest episode yet of the DRF Sports Form podcast, but it absolutely flew by. Lots of fun catching up with you guys. I want to thank Scott Grambling. I want to thank Jonathon Kinchen. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for tuning in, listening, and downloading. Tell your friends about this show. I think this was the best one we've done, and I think it's just gonna continue to get better as time goes along. And we love to have you along for the ride. If you have any questions for us, hit me up at the podcast email we use on the other show. It's just podcast@drf.com. We will be back next week. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale, and I hope all the bounces go your way.